Single dad found a woman passed out in the parking lot. She whispered, "I own this whole building." The rain came down in slanted streaks driven by the kind of wind that crept under jackets and sliced through the seams of tired lives. Ethan Cole pulled the hood of his worn canvas jacket tighter around his face as he adjusted the small body bundled in a faded pink blanket on his shoulder. His daughter Lily breathed softly against his neck, her 7-year-old frame slack with sleep, her fingers still curled around the stuffed rabbit she refused to leave behind. He moved quickly across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, dodging puddles and the glint of broken glass beneath the dim, flickering lights overhead. The storm had rolled in early, sudden, and unapologetic, much like most things in his life since Claire died. Just as he reached the corner of the lot, the beam of a security light sputtered above him and lit up something strange near the far end, a dark shape lying still against the wet pavement, barely visible beside a black Mercedes. Ethan froze. Was it a pile of trash, a drunk trick of the light? He shifted Lily slightly and moved closer, instincts honed by 100 small emergencies screaming for attention. And then he saw her, a woman, sprawled on her side, soaked through one shoe off her head, resting at an unnatural angle against the cold concrete. "Hey," he called out. No response. He crouched down, careful not to jostle Lily, and gently nudged the woman's shoulder. She stirred, moaned faintly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her lips trembled. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy and unfocused. I own this building," she whispered, barely audible over the rain. Ethan blinked. "What?" But her eyes rolled back and her body went limp again. He didn't wait. He checked her pulse, weak, but there. Her forehead had a shallow cut, likely from a fall. She was in her early 30s, maybe her face pale but striking even in its disheveled state. A leather briefcase had spilled open nearby pages, curling with water. A set of heels designer probably sat abandoned a few feet away. Ethan shifted Lily slightly, and with the strength of a man who'd spent his life lifting engines and hoisting his daughter, scooped the woman into his arms. She was light, but dead weight. Lily stirred in his grasp, blinking against the rain. "Daddy," she mumbled. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just helping someone." He carried them both up the stairwell of the aging apartment complex, 3 flights, no elevator. The woman's soaked hair dripped onto his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He nudged open the apartment door with his foot. Inside, their home was clean but modest. A single-bedroom walk-up filled with second-hand furniture, warm lighting, and a faint scent of lavender oil. Lily's idea of keeping memories of her mom alive. Ethan laid the woman gently on the worn couch. Lily, now more alert, wrapped herself in her blanket and watched from the corner of the room, wide-eyed but silent. He fetched the first aid kit from under the sink. After drying the woman off with a towel, he disinfected the cut on her forehead and applied a bandage. Her clothes were soaked. He hesitated, then retrieved a spare t-shirt and sweatpants from Claire's old drawer and turned his back as he changed her carefully, respectfully. "She's pretty," Lily whispered. "She's hurt," Ethan replied. "But she said she owns this building," Lily added, cocking her head. She was probably confused. The woman stirred again, her lips moving soundlessly. Her eyes opened clearer this time, but confusion still clouded them. She looked up at the ceiling, then around the room. Her gaze finally settled on Ethan, who knelt beside her with a damp cloth. "Where am I?" she croaked. "You're safe," Ethan said. "You fainted in the parking lot. I brought you here." Her brows drew together. "Parking lot. You hit your head, probably a mild concussion. Do you want me to call someone?" "An ambulance." She shook her head, quickly wincing at the movement. "No hospitals, please." Ethan frowned. "You're bleeding and disoriented. I'm fine." She tried to sit up. Her legs trembled. Just need a minute." He didn't push her. She looked around again, taking in the humble surroundings, the bookshelf filled with old tools and children's books, the cracked wallpaper, the handmade drawings taped on the fridge. "This is your place." "Yeah, I didn't think. This building still had residents like..." She stopped herself, pursed her lips. "Like me?" Ethan asked evenly. Her expression softened. "I didn't mean it that way." He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and poured her a cup of warm water, offering it without a word. She accepted it quietly. For a moment, the only sound was the rain pattering against the windows. "I didn't catch your name," he said. "Madeline," she replied after a pause. "Madeline Hart." He blinked. The name tugged at something in the back of his memory. A billboard, maybe. A business article on someone's phone at the garage. Then it clicked. "You're the CEO," he said, his voice low. She didn't deny it. "I didn't lie," she murmured. "I do own this building." That was when everything shifted. Ethan didn't speak. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who had patched broken things his entire life, but nothing quite like this. And in that small apartment, under the hum of a flickering ceiling light, two lives, one grounded in quiet resilience, the other shaken by secrets and storms, had just collided. Not by choice, not by fate, but by kindness. By the time Ethan woke the next morning, the rain had stopped. The light filtering through the apartment windows was thin and gray, the kind that didn't promise sunshine, but at least offered a break from the storm. He sat up on the old couch, careful not to wake Lily, who had curled into his side sometime during the night. The woman, Madeline, was gone. The blanket he'd placed over her lay folded neatly on the armrest. The clothes he'd loaned her were gone too. He found the t-shirt and sweatpants folded with military precision on the back of a kitchen chair, along with a note scribbled on the torn edge of a receipt. "Thank you. I won't forget this. M." No phone number, no explanation. No sign that she'd even been there except the lingering scent of her perfume in the air, clean and citrusy, out of place among oil and lavender. Ethan stared at the note for a long time. He wasn't expecting a grand gesture. That wasn't why he'd helped her. But her disappearance without a word left something unsettled in him. A question unanswered. A presence unfinished. Lily stumbled into the kitchen, her hair sticking up in soft curls. "Did the pretty lady leave?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, before we woke up. She didn't even say goodbye." "No, she didn't." Lily frowned, then grabbed her cereal bowl and climbed into the chair across from him. Maybe she had to go back to being in charge. He glanced at her. "What do you mean?" She said she owned the building. "That means she's probably really busy." He said nothing, pouring milk into her bowl. The simplicity of her reasoning tugged at something in him, an innocence he both cherished and feared would be too quickly stripped away by the world outside these walls. After dropping Lily at school and returning from the garage, Ethan stopped at the corner store for groceries. The cashier, an elderly woman named Dee, was leaning over the counter with her usual conspiratorial expression. "You see the news this morning?" she asked, not waiting for him to answer. "Madeline Hart's back in the hot seat. Some kind of scandal about that housing development she's trying to sell. The one right here. This building." Ethan froze. What kind of scandal? Dee tapped her phone and spun it toward him. A headline from a local paper flashed across the screen. "Hart Holdings pushes for eviction of low-income tenants to make room for commercial development." Beneath it was a blurry photo of Madeline walking briskly into a town car, her face hidden behind sunglasses. "She's been buying up properties all over the city," Dee said. "But this building was built by her father, you know? Used to be a good man. Promised this place would stay affordable forever. Guess promises don't mean much when you're rolling in money." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He stepped outside, heart thudding against his ribs like a warning. The woman he'd found in the rain, drenched and shivering, vulnerable and soft-spoken, was the same person spearheading a plan to evict the only community Lily had ever known. And he had let her sleep on his couch, had bandaged her head, had covered her with his late wife's favorite blanket. For a moment, he felt like a fool. But then he remembered her eyes, the fear in them. The way she looked around the apartment like she didn't belong anywhere. The way she whispered, "I own this building," not like a boast, but like a confession. He wasn't ready to condemn her. Not yet. Back at home, Ethan found the briefcase she'd dropped the night before. He hadn't touched it. Out of habit, respect, maybe fear. But now, curiosity overrode all of that. He unlatched the brass clasps and carefully opened it. Inside were documents, real estate contracts, building proposals, financial spreadsheets. Some were marked confidential. Others were scribbled with notes in a quick, looping script. But what stopped him cold was a folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper. A blueprint for this very building, dated 15 years ago. And there in the bottom right corner was a signature. James Hart, Madeline's father. Ethan sat back slowly, the weight of it all settling in his chest. So it was true, this place had once been a promise, a project of hope. And now the daughter of the man who built it was getting ready to erase it. Unless she hadn't made up her mind yet. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Ethan sat in the quiet living room with the documents spread before him. He lit the lamp Claire had picked out from a yard sale and studied the plans with the same hunger he used to have in his college architecture classes before he dropped out to take care of his wife after the accident, before his dreams gave way to bills and bedtime stories and broken brake pads. He saw flaws in the redevelopment plan, areas that could be reworked, spaces that could be preserved. He saw possibilities that no one in a boardroom would bother looking for. And in that moment, something long, dormant, stirred inside him. Not anger, not grief. Purpose, not for revenge, not to expose her, but because maybe he had something to offer. And because the look in Madeline Hart's eyes didn't belong to a villain. It belonged to someone running from something, someone who might be looking for a reason to stay. He didn't know yet if he could give her that reason. But for the first time in years, he wanted to try, and that was enough to begin. 3 days passed. The rain gave way to cold sunlight, and the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. Children hurrying to school, neighbors exchanging nods, and the occasional sound of sirens humming in the distance. For Ethan, life fell back into its old pattern work at the garage, school drop-offs and pickups for Lily, reheated dinners, bedtime stories. But underneath that routine, something had shifted. The briefcase sat tucked beneath his bed now. Every night after Lily was asleep, he would pull out the blueprint, James Hart's original plans, and pore over them. Not to find flaws anymore, but possibilities. He'd started sketching again on the back of old invoices and fast food receipts, reimagining what the building could be if someone actually cared. It felt pointless sometimes. He wasn't an architect. He didn't have a license. No one would care what a single dad in a threadbare apartment thought about urban development. And yet, he kept drawing. That Thursday afternoon, as he scrubbed grease from his hands behind the garage, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Cole?" a woman asked. Her voice was clipped, polished. "Yes, this is Adrienne Keller. I'm Miss Hart's assistant." Ethan stood straighter. "Is she okay?" "She's fine, thank you. She asked me to arrange a brief visit. She'd like to meet with you, in person. Today, if possible." Ethan looked out at the sidewalk. The light was pale and sharp shadows long. "Here." At my apartment, she suggested the building, yes, around 5. He hung up without asking why. By the time he returned home and tidied the small living room, Lily was already home from school and had sensed his unease. "Are we having company?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes." "Is it the lady from the rain?" Ethan nodded. Lily beamed. "Should I draw her something?" He smiled despite himself. "Sure, sweetheart. Something simple." At 5 on the dot, a knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find Madeline standing alone, dressed in a dark coat, heels clicking on the hallway tile. Her hair was pulled back, makeup subtle. She looked different. Colder, perhaps. More put together, like someone who had put every brick of her composure in place before knocking. He stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated just half a second, then walked in. The apartment was as humble as she remembered. Modest furniture, The smell of something warm, casserole maybe. A lamp flickered faintly in the corner. Lily peeked out from behind the hallway wall, grinning. "I drew you this," she announced, holding up a picture. Crayon lines formed a building with flowers on the balconies and stick-figure people smiling in the windows. At the bottom, a small girl stood next to a taller man and a woman with long hair. Madeline knelt to accept the drawing. "Is that me?" Lily nodded proudly. "It's beautiful. Thank you." Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Madeline was poised, but he could see the hesitation in her hands, the uncertainty in her eyes. When Lily skipped off, Ethan motioned to the couch. "Have a seat." She did, carefully smoothing her coat. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said quietly. "I didn't expect to come back." "Then why are you here?" Madeline glanced around as if the answer was hidden somewhere between the bookshelf and the coffee-stained carpet. "I wanted to thank you for what you did that night." "You already did." "Not properly." Ethan crossed his arms. "And now that you've seen where we live, are you still planning to kick us out?" The words landed sharper than he intended. Madeline flinched. "I didn't come here to talk business," Ethan cut in, "because that's what this is, right business." She looked away. "This building is more than numbers on a page," he continued. "There are stories here, lives, people who depend on this roof and the community under it." "I know," she said softly. "No, you don't. You dropped in, disappeared, and now you're back like you're doing us a favor." Madeline's jaw tightened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a document, placing it on the coffee table. "I found this," she said, "tucked in my father's files. It's a personal letter he wrote about this place. He wanted to preserve it, to protect the people here." Ethan's eyes moved to the paper, then back to her. "So what happened?" She hesitated. "He passed. And the company passed to me. Greg Holloway, he's the head of acquisitions, convinced the board that this building was underperforming, that we could redevelop and profit, and you went along with it. Madeline didn't defend herself. I was young, and scared of losing what he left behind. I thought I had to prove something. And now," she exhaled slowly, "now I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just real. Ethan sat down across from her, leaning forward. "You don't have to prove anything by tearing down what your father built." She met his gaze. "Do you believe in second chances, Mr. Cole?" "I do." "I live in one." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "This apartment, this building, this life. It's not the one I planned. I lost my wife, dropped out of school, had to raise a daughter with more love than money. But somehow I've built something worth keeping, something that matters." Madeline looked at him like she hadn't seen anyone in a long time. "Not really." "I have something to show you," she said quietly. She opened her tablet and pulled up a sleek presentation, digital renderings of a future high-rise Clean Lines rooftop pools, retail on the ground floor. Then she swiped to another file, Ethan's blueprints, the ones she'd taken from her briefcase that night. "I've looked at your redesigns," she said. "They're good, better than most of the submissions I've seen in months." "You're not serious." "I am, and I want you to walk me through them." "Tomorrow." Ethan stared at her, not with skepticism but with something else, something unfamiliar, a cautious hope. "Why me?" She smiled, small, genuine, a little sad. "Because I need someone who sees this building as more than a commodity, and because you saved me long before I knew I needed saving." Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing softly against the windows. Inside, for the first time in a long while, something was beginning. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at his own reflection like he was trying to recognize a stranger. His hands were clean, unusual for a weekday. Instead of his usual work boots and grease-streaked jeans, he wore a collared shirt and khakis he hadn't touched since Claire's funeral. They still fit barely. He buttoned the shirt slowly, trying to silence the voice in his head that whispered, This wasn't his world. That no matter how many blueprints he drew, he didn't belong in meetings with CEOs. Daddy Lily said from the hallway, "You look weird." He chuckled, turned to see her leaning against the doorframe in her school uniform, holding her backpack like a shield. "You mean handsome, right?" he teased. She grinned. "I mean, like someone who doesn't fix cars." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Sometimes it's okay to wear your other self. Are you going to go build a building now?" she asked. Maybe he said softly, "Maybe I'm just going to remind someone why it should never be torn down." Madeline's office was nothing like the hallway she had collapsed in that rainy night. It was sleek and angular, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and furniture that looked more like sculpture than seating. But what struck Ethan most wasn't the view or the decor. It was how out of place she looked in it. She stood near the window when he walked in, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she wasn't dressed like armor. She wore a simple navy blouse, her hair tied back loosely, no makeup except for the faintest gloss on her lips. "Coffee?" she asked, gesturing toward the tray on the table. "Sure," he replied, sitting down across from her. "I looked at your revisions last night," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Ethan opened it. Inside were copies of his sketches annotated in neat handwriting. She had circled areas, green spaces. He'd proposed a multi-use community room, child-safe redesigns of stairwells. "I don't know how you thought of all this," she said, tapping a corner of the drawing, "but it's exactly what this building needs." Ethan hesitated. "I didn't design it for what it needs on paper. I designed it for the people who live in it." Madeline nodded, slowly. "That's what makes it different." He looked at her, curious. "Why are you really doing this?" She sighed. "Because I forgot what my father stood for. Somewhere between quarterly reports and investor meetings, I started thinking of buildings as assets. Not as shelter, not as memory." "You were trying to protect the company," Ethan offered gently. She looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to defend me. I'm not, but I get it. We do what we have to when the weight's on our shoulders." For a moment, silence hung between them like a thread of shared exhaustion. "I used to come to that building with him," she said softly. "When I was little, he'd walk the halls, talk to tenants by name. He remembered birthdays. He taught me that buildings weren't just steel and drywall. They're the sum of the people who live inside them." Ethan watched her eyes, how they glistened just slightly. But somewhere along the line, I lost that she continued. "And when my father passed, I inherited something I didn't know how to carry. I trusted Greg Holloway because he made it sound manageable, clinical, profitable. He told me sentimentality was weakness." Ethan leaned back. "Sometimes the world wants you to choose between feeling and surviving." "Exactly." Just then, the door opened. Adrian Madeline's assistant stepped in with a tight smile. "Ms. Hart, Mr. Holloway just arrived. He's expecting to meet you upstairs for the development presentation." Ethan felt the shift in Madeline instantly. Her spine straightened. Her face hardened. "Thank you, Adrienne," she said. "Tell him I'll be 5 minutes." Adrienne nodded and stepped out. Ethan stood. "I should go." "No," she said quickly. "Stay." He paused. "Are you sure?" She walked over to the window, looked out at the skyline, then turned back to him. "Greg thinks I'm still going to present his plan to the board today. He has no idea I'm reconsidering the sale. What happens if you don't go through with it?" She exhaled. "He'll go to the board. He'll say I'm emotionally compromised, that I've become erratic. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to vote me out." "Can he do that?" "If he gets enough votes?" "Yes." Ethan frowned. "Then what's your move?" She hesitated, then met his eyes. "I'm going to present your design instead. I'm going to ask the board for a motion to pause the sale and explore a redevelopment plan that preserves the building's integrity and its people." Ethan's breath caught. "You do that, I have to." Her voice trembled. "Because if I don't, I'll lose more than the company." I'll lose the last thing my father built that ever truly meant something." He didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected this kind of courage, not from someone the world would label cold corporate unreachable. But now, standing there, she looked like anything but those things. "You're not alone in this," he said quietly. "If you stand up for that building, you'll have more than just plans on your side. You'll have every single person who lives there." A soft knock came at the door again. Adrian peeked in. "They're waiting." Madeline nodded. "Tell them I'm ready." Ethan gathered his sketches, heart pounding. Madeline reached for the folder and touched his hand briefly but with intention. "Thank you," she said, "for helping me remember." As she walked out, Ethan remained still for a moment, staring at the skyline through her window. The city looked endless from here, cold, towering, indifferent. But in one corner of that city, in one worn building still clinging to life, a single decision was about to change everything. The elevator ride was silent. Madeline stood with her arms folded across the folder containing Ethan's revised blueprint, her reflection fractured into pieces on the mirrored walls. Beside her, Adrian clutched a tablet and checked the time. Above them, the numbers blinked slowly toward the top-floor executive conference level. "You don't have to do this," Adrian said softly, not looking up. "I do," Madeline replied. "You're risking everything." Madeline glanced at her. "Then I hope it's worth something." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The room beyond was all glass chrome and controlled tension. Around a long glossy table sat the board of Hart Holdings, 6 men and 1 woman, all sharply dressed, all older than Madeline, all looking up in mild surprise as she entered alone. And at the head of the table sat Greg Holloway. He rose smoothly when he saw her spreading his arms like a game show host. "Madeline, right on time," he said with that signature smile that had charmed investors and bulldozed communities. She didn't return the smile. She set the folder on the table. "I won't be presenting your plan today, Greg." A quiet beat of disbelief swept the room. Holloway's face didn't move, but the smile lost its temperature. "I beg your pardon." She opened the folder, spreading out the blueprints for everyone to see. "This is an alternative proposal," she said. "It's a renovation plan for the Monroe Building that preserves both its architectural integrity and its tenant community." The room murmured. Holloway gave a soft, amused laugh. "Madeline, we've been over this. That building is a financial sinkhole. We stand to lose. We stand to gain something we can't buy back if we destroy it," she cut in. "Trust. Purpose. The very foundation Hart Holdings was built on." The woman at the end of the table, Barbara Weiss, the oldest board member and a longtime friend of Madeline's father, leaned forward to examine the sketch. "Who designed this?" Madeline took a breath. "A man who lives in the building. A former architecture student named Ethan Cole. He rebuilt his entire life inside those walls. I asked for his perspective, and he gave me more than that. He gave me vision." Holloway pushed his chair back, face reddening slightly. "We can't seriously entertain this. The numbers don't support it. I have projections, spreadsheets, comparables." "You also have a scandal," Madeline interrupted. The room fell still. She pulled out her phone and set it on the table. On the screen was a paused video Holloway 2 weeks ago in a meeting with an aggressive developer, laughing as he said, "Let them whine. Bulldoze it. Put in a Whole Foods. They'll adapt." Gasps broke around the room. Holloway's composure cracked. "That's out of context," he snapped. Barbara looked directly at him. "You said bulldoze it." Madeline kept her gaze steady. "This company was founded by my father to build communities, not erase them. If we destroy that building, we don't just lose tenants. We lose our identity." Another board member spoke up. "You're asking us to gamble on sentiment. I'm asking you to bet on people," she said, "and on the long-term stability that comes from doing the right thing, even if it doesn't show up on a profit chart next quarter." Barbara tapped a pen against the table. "Let's take a vote." Greg looked around, mouth tight. It wasn't unanimous, but it didn't have to be. The motion passed. Downstairs, Ethan sat in the small cafe across the street from the building, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. He wasn't sure why he had come. Part of him didn't expect her to go through with it. The other part, the part that had sketched plans at midnight that had believed in her eyes, couldn't stay away. He checked his phone again. Nothing. Then footsteps. He turned. Madeline stood in the doorway, the winter sunlight catching in her hair, her coat still buttoned tight. But her eyes were different. "You did it," Ethan said. She walked to the table and sat down, slowly exhaling like someone who'd just surfaced from deep water. "They voted to halt the sale," she said. "They approved your design for redevelopment review." He blinked. "You're serious? I'm not in the habit of lying to people who rescue me from parking lots." They both laughed, a light, cathartic sound that made other diners glance their way. Ethan leaned forward, voice quieter. "You're going to face backlash." "I already have," she said. "Greg is calling for a leadership review. Some investors are furious. Are you okay?" She paused, then nodded. For the first time in a long time. "Yeah, I am." They sat in silence for a moment. The city moved around them, but in that small corner of a downtown cafe, time softened. Madeline reached into her bag and pulled out the crayon drawing Lily had given her. "I kept this with me," she said, "during the meeting." Ethan looked at the simple picture, 3 figures a building, a sun smiling down from the sky. "I think she believed in us before we did," he said. Madeline folded the drawing carefully and tucked it back into her bag. "I'd like to meet her again," she said softly, "when the time's right." "You should," Ethan said. "She's better than both of us. I don't doubt it." A server dropped off the check, but neither of them reached for it. There was something unfinished between them, but not broken, not rushed. Something being built slowly, intentionally, like a home, like trust. Madeline stood. "I have to go speak to the tenants. Let them hear it from me." Ethan stood too. "You want me there?" She paused. "Would that be okay?" He smiled. "You're not walking into that building alone anymore." They walked out together side by side. And though the city hadn't changed, something fundamental had shifted not in its skyline but in the story behind the walls of one aging building. A story of second chances. A story still being written. One step, one voice, one act of kindness at a time. The news spread faster than either of them anticipated. By the next morning, tenants of the Monroe building stood in tight clusters in the courtyard, whispering trading rumors, flipping through printed leaflets that had somehow made it into every mailbox overnight. The headlines were damning, printed in bold, cheap ink. "CEO sleeps with tenant to kill deal, Heart Air derails, $8. 2M redevelopment, over emotional breakdown. Powerless or reckless, Madeline Hart, risks. It all. Ethan stood by the front steps, hands in his jacket pockets, jaw tight. He'd seen sensationalism before on TV and headlines he barely read at the garage, but this was different. This was personal, and it was a direct hit. Madeline arrived just after 10 a.m., walking into the courtyard with her chin high but her shoulders taut. She wore no security, no publicist, no assistant. Just a navy coat and determination in her eyes. A few heads turned. Some glared. Others simply stared. She scanned the faces and then spotted Ethan. Relief flickered in her expression. He stepped forward. "This isn't your fault." She gave a bitter smile. "It kind of is, actually." He said nothing. Neither did she. From the far side of the courtyard, Mrs. Patel, a 70-year-old widow who'd lived in the Monroe building since it opened, hobbled forward. Her hands shook slightly from the cold as she spoke, voice surprisingly strong. "You came to take our homes," she said, eyes locked on Madeline. "And now you come with what an apology." Madeline met her gaze without flinching. "No, I came to say I was wrong, and that I'm staying to fix it." A long silence followed. People shifted, waiting. I was raised in a world where success meant numbers." Madeline continued, voice louder now, "where buildings were bought and sold like playing cards. I forgot that what really matters isn't on the blueprint. It's in the lives between the walls." The crowd murmured again. Some skeptical others moved. A few children peeked out from behind coats, watching the woman who had once been the villain in whispered hallway conversations. "And the man who helped remind me of that," she added, turning to Ethan, "is one of you." Now they were staring at him. Ethan cleared his throat. "Look, I'm not a savior. I'm just someone who wants his daughter to grow up in a home that doesn't keep shifting under her feet." "That's it." Mrs. Patel stepped forward again and reached for Madeline's hand. "Then help us stay." "Really stay, I intend," to Madeline said. There were no cheers, no grand applause, but heads nodded, postures softened. A wall not of brick but of memory and mistrust began to crack. Just then, a black luxury SUV pulled up in front of the building. The door opened and Greg Holloway stepped out. The air shifted. He looked immaculate as always, dressed in a slate-gray coat and leather gloves, his expression unreadable. He strode through the crowd like he owned the concrete. "Well," he said dryly, "quite the public sermon." Madeline squared her shoulders. "You're not welcome here, Greg." "I have every right," he said. "Technically, I'm still part of the board, and you've made quite a few enemies this week in case you haven't noticed." Ethan stepped closer to her, unconsciously placing himself just between them. "You leaked those headlines," Madeline said. Greg raised his eyebrows. "Can't prove that." "You don't have to," she said. "I know your tactics. Intimidation, scandal, divide and conquer." "It works," he said simply. "People don't like chaos. They like winners. Then they've clearly never met the people who live here." Greg chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're playing a dangerous game, Maddie. Sentiment doesn't build cities. Money does. And your little project, it's already bleeding." "Then I'll find a way to keep it alive," she said. Greg leaned in slightly. "We both know you weren't built for this fight. You were meant to look good at charity galas and smile at cameras. Your father, he was the real visionary. You're scared. Soft." Madeline's voice was clear. "Yes, I'm scared. But being scared isn't the same as being weak. You taught me to disconnect. My father taught me to care. I finally chose." Greg stepped back, the smile now thin and fixed. He turned to the gathered residents and said loudly, "Just remember, when this all falls apart, don't say I didn't warn you." Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing against the buildings. When the SUV pulled off, the silence remained. Madeline looked shaken, but she didn't move. Ethan touched her arm gently. "You okay? I will be." From behind them, a voice called out, "We believe you." It was a young father holding a toddler in his arms. A few others nodded. Someone clapped once, then again. Slowly, the noise grew, not a roar, but a quiet, deliberate rhythm of approval. Human. Real. And in that moment, for the first time, Madeline felt like she belonged in the very building her name was written on. That night, Ethan found Madeline sitting on the apartment stoop, her coat wrapped around her tightly eyes, staring up at the stars barely visible between the rooftops. He sat beside her. "You didn't run. That matters." "I've been running my whole life," she said. "I think I finally stopped." They sat in silence for a while, their breath rising in pale clouds. Ethan looked at her, voice low. "You said Greg was right about one thing: you were scared. So am I. Every day." She turned to him. "Then why do you still try?" He gave a soft smile. "Because Lily doesn't care if I fail. She just cares that I show up." Madeline closed her eyes for a moment, then leaned her head against his shoulder just briefly, just enough. Then maybe she whispered, "We keep showing up. For each other. For this place. No matter how scared we are." He didn't answer, but he didn't move either. Sometimes the bravest thing is to stay. And they did. The days that followed were quieter, but not calmer. Madeline's decision to halt the sale had sparked something fragile and alive in the Monroe building. There were hopeful whispers in the stairwells. Children drew pictures of a new building with gardens and libraries. A retired carpenter offered to donate labor. A teenage girl began sketching her own mural to paint in the newly proposed community room. But change, as Ethan knew too well, was not just about plans and speeches. It was about survival. And in the silence, the cracks began to show. It started with a knock on Ethan's door. He opened it to find Luis, a single father of two who worked night shifts and lived in 3C. His face was tense, jaw set. "Did you hear?" Luis asked. "Hear what Luis handed over a letter. They're raising the rent next month. 40%. Ethan scanned the document, heart sinking. It was legal cold, curt, and effective immediately. "They can't do that," Ethan muttered. The board approved the redevelopment. Madeline's working on a long-term plan. Luis gave a bitter laugh. Well, someone in management didn't get the memo. Across the hallway, Mrs. Patel opened her door. "I got one too," she called. "They're trying to smoke us out." Ethan's stomach turned. This wasn't just a policy delay. This was sabotage. Madeline was in her office, eyes red from lack of sleep when Ethan arrived. He didn't knock. He simply walked in, rent notices clutched in his hand. "They're retaliating," he said. She looked up, startled. The management company, likely under Greg's influence, they're issuing rent hikes. To everyone. She blinked, trying to focus. "But they can't." "Yes, they can," he interrupted, voice tight. "They're exploiting a loophole in the lease renewal clauses. The board hasn't ratified your plan into a formal resolution yet. Legally, it's still in limbo." Madeline stood, eyes wide. "They're trying to make me look incompetent. They're trying to make you look powerless." The word hung in the air like smoke. She paced to the window. The city below glittered unbothered. From here, Monroe was just another building in a sea of steel and glass. Forgettable. Disposable. "I'll call a board vote," she said. "You don't have time. Then I'll go public." Ethan hesitated. "Are you ready for that?" She turned fire rising beneath the fatigue. "I wasn't ready for any of this, but I've come too far to let them take it from me now." That night she held a town hall in the community room. Word had spread. Nearly everyone came. Ethan watched her from the back of the room, Lily curled up on his lap. Madeline stood before the crowd without notes or a podium. Just herself. And the truth. "I want to be transparent," she began. "The redevelopment is moving forward, but some are working behind the scenes to block it. That includes issuing rent hikes meant to scare you. Gasps, whispers. But I'm here to tell you, you do not have to leave. I will personally fight to freeze rent adjustments until the renovations begin. I've already started legal proceedings." A tenant raised his hand. "What happens if you lose?" Madeline didn't flinch. "Then I lose. But I'd rather fail fighting for what's right than win by staying silent." Mrs. Patel stood. "And what can we do?" Madeline looked around. "You can stay. You can speak. You can tell your stories. If they try to erase you, you be louder." A pause. Then applause. It began softly, tentatively, but it grew. Not because the people were convinced she could win, but because she wasn't leaving them behind. Back in Ethan's apartment, the mood was quieter. Lily had gone to bed. Madeline sat on the edge of the couch, her expression distant. "You were good tonight," Ethan said gently. "I don't know if it was enough," she replied. "It was real. That's what people remember." She rubbed her hands together. "I spent my entire life trying to be like my father, but I never realized the part of him that mattered most wasn't how he built buildings. It's how he stood inside them with people." Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter watching her. "He'd be proud of you." She scoffed, eyes brimming. "Maybe. Or maybe he'd wonder why it took me so long to see the obvious. Seeing it late is better than never seeing it at all." There was a pause. A long, weighted pause. "I'm scared, again," she whispered. "So am I." She looked up. I keep thinking, if I fail this time, it's not just my name. It's theirs. All of them. Ethan crossed the room, kneeling in front of her. You're not carrying this alone. Not anymore. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, unspoken, fragile, and unshakably real. And in the quiet, she leaned her forehead against his. Not a kiss, not yet. Just the comfort of shared battlefields. But while the tenants slept that night beneath patched roofs and hopeful dreams in a glossy office on the other side of town, Greg Holloway was already 3 steps ahead. He stood at a private bar with 2 men from the investment group backing the original redevelopment. In his hand he held a file, Ethan's file. Single father, high school diploma, former student at Seattle Tech, never finished. No license, no permits. He dropped the file on the bar. Tomorrow morning, Greg said, we remind the city what happens when amateurs try to play architect. He raised his glass in a silent toast. And smiled. Beneath the surface of hope, the storm hadn't passed. It had only paused. But this time, they wouldn't face it alone. The headlines came the next morning, sharp as blades. Unlicensed man. Behind Hart Holdings, redevelopment plan. Single father with no credentials. Is Monroe's future, built on false promises. From grease to glass. CEO's risky bet on a mechanic turned architect. Ethan stared at the articles in disbelief, coffee cooling in his hand. His phone buzzed endlessly, friends from the garage, messages from neighbors, even Lily's school had called to ask about the media situation. He turned off the phone. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was betrayal. The photos they used were grainy, one from the garage, one taken without his consent at the town hall. He looked like exactly what they wanted him to be, a man pretending to belong in a world too far above him. The knock on the door was inevitable. Madeline stood there breathless, her coat unbuttoned, a folder in her hand. Ethan. He didn't let her in right away. He stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. You knew this would happen, he said quietly. I didn't know they had a file on you. But you knew Greg would go for blood. Madeline looked down, shame-painting shadows beneath her eyes. I thought if I stayed ahead, if I kept pushing the vote, filed the motions, he wouldn't have time. Well, Ethan said, voice bitter. He made time. She tried to hand him the folder. I filed an official complaint with the press board and the housing committee. They're investigating the leak. He didn't take it. And what do you think that changes? He asked. You told everyone my design would save this place, and now they know it came from someone who on paper isn't qualified to design a doghouse. Madeline's voice trembled. Your work is more than qualified. But I'm not, am I? The words hung heavy. Lily peeked out from her bedroom. Her eyes were wide, quiet. Madeline followed his gaze and swallowed hard. I didn't come here to fix this with papers, Ethan. I came because none of this works without you. He closed his eyes, and for a long moment neither of them moved. I can't protect you from the whole world, she whispered. I wasn't asking you to, he said. I just needed you to believe I belonged in it. He didn't go to the garage that day. Instead, he took Lily to the park near the edge of the city, the one Claire used to bring her to when she was still strong enough to walk without pain. The swings were faded now. The benches were chipped, but the air was still honest. Lily swung her legs quietly beside him. She didn't ask why he wasn't at work. Did you build our building? She asked finally. Ethan shook his head. No, baby. I just helped to draw something better for it. Then why are people saying mean things about you? He looked up at the sky. Because sometimes when you try to change something, the people who liked it broken get scared. Lily thought about this. But your drawings were nice. And the lady said they were smart. He looked at her. She did. And I don't care if they said you didn't finish school. You finished my room. He smiled through the sting in his eyes. Yeah, she nodded. And you made it warm. That night he returned to his apartment alone after Lily had gone to a sleepover. The place was quiet. Still. and on his kitchen table sat the original blueprint James Hart had drawn, the one Ethan had studied like scripture. He looked at it now, not as a technician or an employee or a hopeful, but as a father, as a man who had once thought he'd lost the right to dream. And then, without ceremony, he sat down and began to sketch again. This time, not to prove anything, not to the board, not to Madeline, not to Greg, but to himself. At the same time, across the city, Madeline faced a different storm. The boardroom was quieter than usual, but the pressure in the air was deafening. Greg sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, smiling like a man who'd already won. Barbara Weiss looked between them. This smear campaign targeting Mr. Cole was this from your office. Mr. Holloway, Greg's smile didn't falter. Information found in public record. We simply compiled it. The public has a right to transparency, especially when unlicensed individuals are shaping multi-million-dollar assets. Barbara turned to Madeline. Your response? Madeline stood slowly. Her voice didn't waver. I don't deny the facts. Mr. Cole isn't licensed, but what he has, what none of us have, is a lived experience of the Monroe Building. He understands it from the inside. He earned every line on that sketch not in classrooms but in sacrifice. Another board member scoffed. And you're willing to stake your name on him? She nodded. I already did. And I'll do it again. A beat of silence. Barbara tapped her pen twice. Then I believe we should hear directly from Mr. Cole. Set a formal meeting. Greg leaned back, visibly irritated. Or we could cancel the entire circus. No, Barbara said sharply, because sometimes the heart behind the plan matters more than the title on the degree. Later that evening, Ethan found a letter taped to his door. Inside was a simple note in Madeline's handwriting. They're calling a meeting. They want to hear from you. For real this time. Not as a risk, but as a voice. You decide whether you want to speak. I'll back you either way. M. And at the bottom, in Lily's handwriting, her unmistakable scrawl, You build good things, Daddy. Ethan held the note for a long time. Then he picked up his coat and turned the light back on. The boardroom didn't look so intimidating the second time, just expensive. Ethan stood outside its glass doors holding a leather folder Lily had insisted he carry. Inside were his blueprints, some printed, some hand-drawn edges still frayed from nights he'd spent sketching them on his kitchen floor. He wore a clean shirt, same one from the night of the town hall. His hands were shaking, but his feet weren't. Across from him, Madeline stood quietly watching him with a kind of steadiness he didn't yet believe he'd earned. You don't have to be anything you're not, she said softly. I know, he replied. She hesitated. Whatever happens, you've already changed something, even if they don't see it. He gave her a half-smile. They will. Madeline reached for the door. You ready? No, he said honestly, but I'm here. She opened the door. Inside, the board members sat in their usual seats. Greg Holloway, arms folded, smirked the moment Ethan stepped in. Barbara Weiss gave a brief nod, as did two others, but most wore the expression of people expecting to be unimpressed. Ethan walked to the head of the table, placed his folder down, and opened it. He didn't clear his throat, didn't look at Madeline for a signal. He simply looked around the room. My name is Ethan Cole. I've lived in the Monroe Building for 10 years, raised my daughter there, lost my wife there, fixed leaky pipes when no one came, helped neighbors when the elevators broke, built bunk beds from salvaged lumber. I know every crack in the wall and what it means. He paused. I'm not licensed. You all know that. But I was 2 years into an architecture degree before life pulled me in another direction. That doesn't make me less capable. It makes me more committed. He held up the main blueprint. This is the building you wanted to replace with a glass tower. A structure built by Madeline's father, someone who believed in dignity and shelter. You wanted to erase it. I wanted to evolve it. He pointed to the plans. We're not proposing luxury. We're proposing livability, community, efficiency, design that's not just beautiful, but belonging. Greg scoffed audibly. "Mr. Cole, with all due respect, your story doesn't build equity. This is a business." Ethan turned to him calmly. "You're right, it is. But what you seem to forget is that people stay in communities that feel human. That is good business. People talk. Cities listen. If you flatten this building, you'll lose the people. You'll lose the story. And in 5 years, it'll be just another development with a vacancy problem." Barbara raised her hand gently. "What are you asking of us?" Ethan took a breath. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for a chance. A trial period. Let us begin. Phase 1, refurbishing the East Wing. If after 6 months occupancy improves, community involvement rises, and costs stay sustainable, we continue. If not, you go back to the drawing board." Another board member leaned forward. "You'd do that. Put your design on the line." "I already did," Ethan said. "Every night I stayed up working on it. Every floorboard I imagined Lily walking across. I don't need a title to care about the people who live beneath my own ceiling." The room fell quiet. Madeline watched the board heart pounding. For once, she didn't speak, didn't steer. She just let truth do the talking. After a long minute, Barbara tapped her pen. "I move to vote on the Phase 1 pilot proposal led by Mr. Cole under the supervision of an accredited architect of our choosing." "Seconded," said another voice. Greg looked furious, but the votes began to tally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Majority. Madeline exhaled. Ethan didn't react, at least not outwardly. He simply nodded once as though he'd just closed the hood on a perfectly repaired engine. Greg stood up, voice icy. "This company is no longer about excellence. It's about charity." Madeline stood too, her voice steady. "This company is about impact. My father knew that, and so do I." Greg stormed out. Outside, Ethan stepped into the afternoon light. He didn't say anything for a moment. Madeline followed behind, silent until they reached the street. "You did it," she said quietly. He turned to her, eyes soft. "No, we did." She looked down, then back up. "You knew exactly what to say. I didn't plan it. I just told the truth." A pause. "Why didn't you look at me in the room?" she asked. "Because I needed to believe I belonged there." "First," he replied. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "And now?" "Now," he said, stepping closer, "I believe it." The city moved around them, horns, honking people, rushing dogs, barking. But in that sliver of sidewalk, a quiet clarity held them still. "I want to build something real," he said. "Not just walls and windows. Something we don't run from." Madeline's eyes searched his. "With me, with you," he said. "If you're ready for something that doesn't come with a manual." She smiled, a small vulnerable curve of her lips. "No blueprints." He shook his head. "Just heart." She took his hand, and this time neither of them let go. The east wing of the Monroe building was quieter than usual that morning. Not silent, never silent in a place filled with children and the daily churn of ordinary lives, but quieter in a way that suggested something new was about to begin. Ethan stood in front of the entrance blueprints under one arm, coffee in hand, and a sense of responsibility in his chest that felt heavier and more sacred than ever before. He looked up at the weathered brick, the faded paint around the windowsills, the rusting balconies that had held decades of flower pots, laundry lines, and whispered conversations. He knew every inch of it. But today, he would not simply walk through it. Today, he would lead its transformation. The first day of Phase 1 renovations began not with machinery, but with a community meeting in the old laundry room. Ethan and Madeline had transformed the space-folding chairs arranged in a circle, posters with sketches of the new designs hung on the wall, snacks for the kids, and plenty of fresh coffee. The room filled quickly, not just with tenants but with volunteers, a retired plumber from 4B, 2 college students from the community center, even a local hardware store owner who offered discounted supplies. They didn't come for the paycheck. They came because something was finally happening, and they wanted to be a part of it. Ethan stood at the front, nervous, until Lily appeared beside him and took his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. He smiled down at her, then turned to the crowd. "Most of you already know me," he began. "But today, I'm not just your neighbor. I'm your project manager. And more importantly, I'm your listener." The crowd chuckled, warm and supportive. "We're not here to change your home into something unrecognizable. We're here to make it stronger, safer, more dignified. With your help." Madeline stepped forward, then her voice clear. "We're starting with this wing. New flooring, safer stairwells, better lighting, and a shared courtyard where the parking lot used to be. If this works, the rest of the building follows. But we need your feedback every step of the way. And this isn't a top-down project. This is a side-by-side rebuild." Mrs. Patel raised her hand. "Will you fix the elevator?" Ethan grinned. "Yes, ma'am. That's day 3. She nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'm too old for 5 flights of guilt." Laughter rippled through the room. And something else, too, belonging. In the following days, the East Wing blossomed not just in construction, but in spirit. Walls were repainted by teenagers who'd never held a brush. Elderly residents supervised with gentle critique and surprising humor. The courtyard plans were adjusted based on suggestions from single moms who wanted safer play areas and from a former Army medic who offered to design a small first aid station. Ethan walked from unit to unit with his folder, accepting feedback, updating measurements, solving problems. He wore a reflective vest over his old work boots and carried a pencil behind his ear like a badge of quiet pride. Everywhere he went, people called him by name. "Ethan, come check this crack in the foundation." "Hey, Ethan, the lights on the 3rd floor keep flickering." "Ethan, I found your daughter drawing murals on the walls again." He laughed at that last one. Lily had claimed a spot just off the stairwell, sketching a rising sun with flowers reaching up toward it. Her crayons were scattered on the floor, her brow furrowed in focus. "You're not supposed to draw on the walls, kiddo," he said gently. She looked up, undeterred. "But we're rebuilding, right?" He knelt beside her. "Yes, but usually on paper." She pointed to the drawing. "This is for everyone to see, like a promise." Ethan stared at it for a moment, heart full. "Okay, but one mural." Deal, she said, and went right back to coloring. That evening, Ethan and Madeline sat on a makeshift bench in the courtyard, now just gravel and flagged-off construction zones, but somehow already transformed by intent. They sipped tea from mismatched mugs, watching the sky burn orange behind the skyline. "You've done more in a week than we managed in a year," Madeline said. "You gave us a reason to try," he replied. She smiled, but her eyes were tired. "You know Greg's still not done right." Ethan nodded. "I know. He's working behind the scenes trying to rally a vote of no confidence. He's betting this won't last. That will burn out." Ethan looked around at the workers still finishing up at the teenager handing out bottled water at the elderly man repairing a railing with one hand and a cane in the other. "We're still here," he said, "and we're not going anywhere." Madeline turned to him, her voice quieter. "You're not just building a place, Ethan. You're building trust, and that's harder than brick." He shrugged. "Guess I've learned to start with what's broken." She looked at him, and there it was again, that gentle, unspoken connection neither had tried to define. Not yet, but it was growing, like roots under the foundation. That night, the East Wing glowed, not with fancy lights or designer decor, but with the soft illumination of repaired bulbs, laughter through open windows, and footsteps on newly secured stairwells. Ethan stood at the threshold, looking back one last time before heading home. It still needed work, a lot of it, but it was beginning to resemble what he had dreamed of in those late, quiet nights, a place that protected its people, not pushed them out. A place worthy of being called home. He pulled out his pencil and scribbled one final note on his clipboard. This building doesn't need to be new, it just needs to remember who it's for. and then he walked back to Lily, to Madeline, and to whatever came next. Because sometimes the greatest rebuild starts from the inside out. Winter came gently that year, not with blizzards or bitter winds, but with the kind of stillness that settles into a neighborhood after the noise fades after the hard work is done. Snow dusted the rooftops of the Monroe building like powdered sugar. The scaffolding was finally gone. The east wing was complete. The other sections, once crumbling now promising, were well underway. Inside apartment 2A, Ethan stood by the window holding a mug of coffee watching Lily chase snowflakes in the courtyard with the neighbor kids. She wore a red scarf too big for her neck and boots that squeaked when she ran, but her laughter echoed up the brick walls like a hymn. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Madeline's hand slid around his waist, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "She looks happy," she said. "She is," Ethan replied. "She keeps saying this is the best winter ever." Madeline smiled. "She's not the only one." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their little world move gently beneath them. "So," she said softly, "are you ready for tonight?" Ethan looked at her bemused. "Ready to be honored at a City Hall gala I never asked to be part of, not even a little." Madeline laughed. "Too bad. You're the face of community redevelopment now." He groaned. "Do I have to make a speech?" She kissed his cheek. "Only if you want to make me cry in public." "Tempting," he said. But no. The gala was a modest affair held in the old city theater-turned-community space. No red carpet, just warm lights and hand-painted signs made by children from the neighborhood. The banner read, "Celebrating the Heart," behind the walls. Ethan arrived with Madeline and Lily, who wore a sparkly dress and insisted on bringing a drawing to give to the mayor. It showed the Monroe building with cartoon people smiling out every window. Ethan, Madeline, and Lily stood together at the center, arms linked. Above them, in bold crayon, "Home is who stays." The room was packed, residents, local officials, volunteers, families. Many had shown up simply to say thank you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Barbara Weiss took the small stage, first leaning on her cane with the poise of someone who had seen many things rise and fall in the city and chose to stand with what rose from kindness. This building, she began, was once slated for demolition. It was marked as underperforming, outdated, and irrelevant. But instead of tearing it down, we witnessed something extraordinary, people choosing to build forward, not just with tools, but with heart. She turned toward Ethan and Madeline. "Tonight, we honor not the structure, but the soul of what was saved, and who saved it." Ethan was invited up. He resisted, then relented when Lily shoved him gently from behind and whispered, "Go on, Daddy." The applause was warm. No flashes, no microphones, just a quiet expectation of sincerity. Ethan stepped to the front, looking down at the drawing in his hand, then out at the sea of familiar faces. "I used to think I lost my blueprint when my wife died," he said. "But I was wrong. I just hadn't seen the full design yet." He paused, letting the hush settle around his words. "Buildings are more than beams and brick. They're containers for our hardest moments and our best memories. I didn't build this place, but I fought for it, because I believe the people who live in it deserve more than survival. They deserve to be seen." He looked over at Madeline, who had tears in her eyes but didn't look away. And someone who had every reason to walk away, chose to stay, chose to fight beside us, not above us. He raised Lily's drawing. "This isn't a blueprint," he said, "but it's the clearest plan I've ever seen." Laughter, applause, a few tears. Later that night, back at Monroe, the courtyard was strung with lights. Families gathered in clusters with hot cider and wool blankets. Kids made snow angels near the mural Lily had painted, now preserved behind clear panels. Ethan stood with Madeline on the edge of it all, watching the building glow from within. "Greg finally stepped down," she said quietly. "Board elected a new majority, ones who see the long term, ones who value community. Ethan nodded. What about you? She looked up at him. I'm staying. Here. With the people who taught me how to lead. Lily ran over then, breathless cheeks pink with cold. Can we light the tree now? Ethan looked to the center of the courtyard where an old pine had stood neglected for years. Now it was wrapped in string lights, donated ornaments, and handwritten notes from tenants, notes of hope, of memory, of names no longer forgotten. He knelt beside Lily and handed her the cord. Go ahead, he said. You've earned it. She plugged it in. The lights flickered, then bloomed into brilliance. The crowd erupted in cheers. Madeline reached for Ethan's hand, and this time he didn't hesitate. He held it firmly, fingers laced with hers. You did it, she whispered. He shook his head. We did. And we're just getting started. That night, as snow began to fall again, the Monroe building stood quietly beneath it all. Not perfect, not finished, but reborn. Because sometimes the best kind of love doesn't arrive with grandeur. Sometimes it shows up in a storm. Sometimes it sleeps on your couch. Sometimes it teaches you how to rebuild a wall, and sometimes it teaches you how to tear one down. Not every second chance begins with forgiveness. Some begin with faith. Some begin with a door that stays open. And some, like this one, begin with a single act of kindness that refuses to end. Because the building was never just about shelter. It was always about the people who never stopped choosing to stay. Together. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let us know what part of the story touched you the most. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you smile, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Your time, your support, and your kindness mean the world to us. See you in the next story. Single dad took the night shift. Then a mysterious guest arrived and asked for room 211. With him. The rain came down in sheets that blurred the edges of the world. From behind the front desk of the Crestwood Inn, David Harper watched as headlights flickered through the downpour, then disappeared behind the soaked curtain of night. He adjusted the thermostat out of habit, even though he knew the lobby was already warm. Behind the desk, the soft glow of a desk lamp cast a cone of light over a photo frame. Lily, 7, beaming in her Halloween fairy costume. A tooth missing. Joy unmistakable. He smiled, but the expression didn't linger. Not on nights like this. David took the late shift most evenings, partly for the quiet, partly because it allowed him to keep Lily in the small staff lounge behind the desk where she did her homework and fell asleep watching cartoons on mute. He checked the time, 10:42 p.m. Late, but not unusually so. Then the front door opened. The bell above chimed delicate and sharp. A woman stepped in from the storm, wearing a long beige coat, now soaked through at the shoulders, her hood partially up, shadows obscuring half her face. She carried no luggage. David stood the hotelier and him switching on automatically. Evening, he said, soft but clear. Rough weather tonight. Can I help you? The woman lowered her hood. Her face was pale, the kind of pale that didn't come from the rain but from something deeper, absence, weariness, something lived in and unshaken. Her eyes, a washed gray blue, were steady but unreadable. She walked up to the counter with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. Yes, she said, her voice calm but distant. I'd like room 211. Please. David blinked. He kept a mental map of the inn's 16 rooms, most of them basic and forgettable. Room 211 was technically still on the roster but had been unused for years after a burst pipe led to an expensive repair job no one had ever followed through on. Maintenance eventually got the bathroom functional, but for reasons he couldn't explain they just never reopened it to guests. I'm sorry, he said slowly. Room 211 isn't usually rented out. It's not listed. Her gaze didn't waver. I understand, but I'd still like it. Just for one night, if it's not too much trouble. David hesitated. The computer showed a near-empty registry. No real reason to say no. He studied her again. No makeup, no perfume. Slight tremor in her hand as she tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. Not dangerous, not unstable, just off-center, like someone who hadn't felt safe in a long time. He exhaled. "All right, just a moment." She nodded, and only then did her eyes drift to the photo frame on the desk. Her breath caught so subtly he almost missed it. "Is that your daughter?" she asked, voice softer than before. David looked over his shoulder at the picture. "Yeah, that's Lily." A long pause. "She's beautiful." He smiled faintly, fingers tapping the keyboard as he reactivated Room 211's profile. "She is," he agreed. When he handed her the key, her fingers brushed his. Ice cold. "Thank you," she said. "Let me know if you need anything," David replied. "There's extra blankets in the room. Heat kicks in slow, but it'll get there." She nodded and turned her shoes, squeaking slightly on the tile floor. As she passed through the hallway and vanished around the bend, something in David's chest stirred uneasily. Not fear, not even suspicion. Something older. A pull, like a puzzle piece nudging into place somewhere deep in his subconscious. Then, from behind the half-closed door of the staff lounge, Lily stirred. Her voice was sleepy, small. Dad David stepped over and opened the door gently. "Hey, you're still up." She rubbed her eyes. "Was someone here? Just a guest checking in?" "What's her name?" David paused, didn't ask. Lily tilted her head. "That's weird. You always ask." He knelt beside her and pulled the blanket up over her shoulders. "Guess I forgot." She leaned against him, her forehead pressed into his shoulder. "Okay. Night, Daddy." He kissed her hair. "Night bug." Back at the front desk, David reopened the registration record, curious now. He scrolled through the line where name and ID usually went. Blank. He checked the surveillance feed's standard angle hallway shot. The woman was standing outside Room 201, hand on the doorknob. But she wasn't going in. She was staring at the number plate. Her lips moved, barely visible. David leaned closer to the screen. Then she turned. Looked straight into the lens of the camera like she knew exactly where it was. And smiled. Not threatening. Not mocking. Just haunting. He sat back slowly, heart-tapping once then again. Room 211. She hadn't asked for any amenities. No questions, no bags, just that room. And for one strange, disquieting second, David had the inexplicable sensation that she knew far more about this place about him than he knew about her. The storm raged louder against the windows, but the lobby had gone still. Behind the desk, the cursor blinked next to the blank name field. David typed in 2 words before locking the system. Unknown guest. And deep inside the hallway Room 211 finally clicked shut. The morning light bled gently through the blinds of Room 211, casting long golden slats across the worn carpet and muted walls. The silence inside was heavy, not oppressive, but contemplative, like the hush of a cathedral after the last hymn fades. Ella Morgan sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She hadn't slept. In her lap, her fingers twisted a small silver ring, dull with age. She turned it over and over. The inside was engraved, barely legible now, Hope. Always. She whispered the name aloud as if it needed air to stay alive. Hope? It wasn't what they named her in the adoption papers, she knew that. But it was the name she gave her daughter, soft, fierce, defiant. A name whispered into the warmth of a newborn's ear while doctors and orderlies looked away. The only thing she was ever allowed to give her child. And now she was here in a room she hadn't entered before, but which somehow felt like it had waited. Like time had slowed inside it, waiting for this one specific collision of souls. She rose, brushing down her coat, and stepped to the window. From here she could see the courtyard below. And there, near a rusted garden bench, a man knelt gently braiding a little girl's hair. The girl was laughing, arms flailing as she tried to chase something, maybe a butterfly, maybe just the wind. The man caught her again, wrapped her up in a hug, and she squealed. Ella pressed her hand to the glass. Lily. She knew, not with logic, not through court documents or DNA or signed affidavits. She knew in the way a mother knows a child's scent, the way a storm knows the weight of rain. Tears slid quietly down her face. Down in the courtyard, David's back tensed. He didn't know why. Just a prickle, a sense that he was being watched, not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt intimate. Exposed. He looked up toward the second-floor window. A shadow moved. He let it go. Daddy Lily said between giggles, "Can we get a donut before school?" David grinned. "Is that a question or a demand?" "Demand," she beamed. "Well, I guess I have no choice then." They left for school shortly after. Ella remained at the window long after the car disappeared from the lot. When David returned mid-morning, the lobby was quiet. The rain from last night had dried into a soft mist, and sunlight filtered in through the high windows, making the room feel more alive than it had in weeks. The key for room 201 sat on the desk. No note, no checkout, no sign she had ever been there except for the key and the faint scent of lilacs. He moved to the security console and rewound the feed. There she was, early morning, walking softly down the hallway. No suitcase, just that long coat and a tired elegance. She paused near the desk, looked directly into the camera again. Then she smiled. Not haunting this time. Just gentle. Like forgiveness. That night, David sat with Peter, his best friend since high school, now the town's police chief, over greasy diner burgers and bad coffee. She asked for room 211. She knew about it. "No one knows about that room, Pete." Peter raised a brow. Maybe she stayed there before. "No, not possible. We stopped booking that room before I even got hired." Peter leaned back. "What are you thinking I'm thinking?" Something about her didn't add up, but not in a bad way. Like she knew more than I did, but didn't want to use it against me. Peter studied him a moment. "You think she knew Lily David's fork stilled?" "I think." She recognized her. Silence. "You ever think about where Lily came from?" Peter asked carefully. David nodded slowly. "Only every day." The next evening, just after sunset, a small package arrived at the inn. No return address. Inside was a children's book, hand-bound cloth cover, faded and soft. The title was stitched into the front in delicate thread, "The Cloud That Came Back." David opened it. The first page was a handwritten dedication. For H. May you never forget how far love will chase you. His heart caught. He flipped through pages illustrated with watercolor clouds and forests. A little girl made of mist who gets lost only to be followed through mountains and rivers by a gentle wind that calls her name until she finds her way back. On the last page, beneath the final drawing, a single line was scrawled in familiar cursive. "I used to tell her this story every night." David set the book down slowly. Every hair on his arm stood up. He walked to the back room where Lily was drawing on the floor with colored pencils. "Hey, Bug," he said gently. "Got something for you." She looked up, eyes bright. He handed her the book. She held it like treasure, flipped through the first few pages and gasped. "I know this," she said. "I know this story." David's breath stalled. "Where did you hear it?" he asked. "I don't remember. I just do." She hugged the book to her chest. "Can I keep it?" He nodded. "Of course." She disappeared into the lounge with it. David stood frozen in place. It wasn't possible. But it was. She remembered. Outside, the wind picked up. The last leaves of autumn danced across the parking lot, caught in spirals like tiny whispers. David stepped onto the front porch and looked down the road. No sign of the woman. No signature. No return address. Just a story woven into memory, sewn into love, and left behind like a breadcrumb on the path back to something long buried. Back to a name. a name she hadn't spoken in 7 years. Hope. The quiet hum of the rental car engine did nothing to still the noise in Ella's mind. She sat in the vehicle across from the Crestwood Inn engine, idling headlights off hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel her knuckles had gone pale. She had told herself she wouldn't come back. One night. That was the plan. She would see her confirm that Lily was alive healthy, and if fate were kind happy. Then disappear. Forever, if needed. But Ella Morgan had never been good at goodbye. Not when it mattered. She stared across the parking lot toward the front desk window. Light spilled from it like a warm invitation. Inside, she imagined David was reading or tidying up, keeping his hands busy to distract a mind that likely never truly rested. She didn't hate him. That surprised her. In her fantasies, delirious dreams on long European nights where loneliness pressed like fog, she had imagined the man who raised her daughter with 100 faces. Some cruel, some negligent, some forgettable. But never this. Never kind eyes, never steady hands, never someone who made Hope Lily laugh with her whole chest. Ella exhaled and looked down at the folder in her passenger seat. The file was thin-aged, frayed at the corners like a wound never allowed to fully close. It bore the seal of Durham County's Child Protective Services and a paperclip holding an old hospital bracelet, Baby Morgan, 07-14. Her hands trembled. She flipped the file open again for the 1,000th time. 7 years earlier. The hospital room had smelled of antiseptic and lavender lotion. Ella had insisted on bringing her own. One act of rebellion against the clinical sterility of her forced stay. She was 28, smart, finishing her master's in early childhood development. But none of that mattered when the test turned positive and the father vanished into silence. Her parents, devout in image, pristine in social standing, called in favors. Her mother used words like temporary guardianship and mental health hold. Her father wrote checks that made records disappear. Ella, weakened after a long labor, was declared emotionally unfit to parent her daughter before she had even held her properly. The baby was whisked away to a safer place. Ella had screamed that day. Screamed until her throat bled and nurses threatened sedation. But no one listened. No one stayed. They named the baby Hope only on her private, handwritten notes. The legal records never reflected it. To the world, her daughter became a case number, and just like that, she was gone. Ella stared at the photo tucked in the file. Grainy, black and white. A scan of the only official image she had managed to find from the adoption archives. A 6-month-old baby in a county crib, cheeks full, fingers, curled eyes wide with unknowing. For years after that, Ella spiraled. Not just grief, but gaslighting grief. The kind where the people closest to you insist nothing wrong ever happened, that your pain is imagined, that you should be grateful for being spared the burden of motherhood. She checked into a clinic in Geneva at 29. Stayed for nearly 4 years. Not because she was insane, but because she couldn't live in a world that called her grief delusion. But healing doesn't ask permission. It creeps in quietly in the form of a good nurse, a poem under a pillow, a fellow patient who'd lost a son in war and didn't question her pain. And one day, Ella woke up and said, "I want to go home." Back in the States, the only thing she had to go on was a partial trail of where her daughter might have gone. Adoption agencies were sealed tight, but a kind clerk at the county archives herself, an adoptee, pointed Ella toward a handful of hospitals where a baby fitting Hope's profile had received treatment. It took 9 months. 9 months to narrow the list from 50 names to 1. A man named David Harper had applied for adoption 6 years earlier. He was a widower. No prior children. Lived in a modest house, worked nights. The girl he adopted, Lily, had no known relatives. Ella didn't care about legal guardianship anymore. She didn't want custody. She just needed to know her daughter hadn't vanished into the abyss. And now, she knew. A knock on the car window startled her. Ella jerked upright heartbeat, lurching only to find a teenage boy, maybe 17, holding out a cup of coffee from a nearby food truck. She rolled the window down slightly. He smiled. Lady inside said, "This was for you. You've been sitting out here like a ghost for 20 minutes. Ella blinked. "Lady Barista. Said she saw you last night. Figured you'd come back." Ella hesitated. "Thank you." The boy handed her the cup, nodded, and walked away. She looked at the lid. A small heart was drawn in black marker. Beneath it, the word courage. Ella swallowed the lump in her throat. Sometimes the universe doesn't whisper. Sometimes it sends you teenagers with paper cups and bad handwriting. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold air, her coat wrapped tighter this time. She wasn't going to confront David. She wasn't going to demand anything. But she was done watching through glass. She was ready to stand in the light. As she crossed the street, her steps were tentative but firm, and behind her the first flurries of snow began to fall soft, almost invisible. Ella Morgan walked into the warmth of the Crestwood Inn for the second time, no longer anonymous. And this time she knew exactly why she was there. The hiss of the coffee machine filled the staff kitchen as David leaned against the counter, watching the slow drip fill his chipped mug. Outside, late autumn light painted the lobby in amber hues, and somewhere in the back room Lily was humming as she colored. David let the hum anchor him. It had been a strange few days. He hadn't heard from the woman again. No calls, no follow-up. Just the book, the story Lily swore she remembered without ever having heard it. The cloud that came back. It sat now on her nightstand like it belonged there, as if it had never left. As if it had always waited. David rubbed the bridge of his nose, his thoughts tangled. Then, as if summoned by memory, Peter stepped in through the side door, his police jacket unzipped, hair wind-blown. He dropped a box of donuts on the counter and poured himself a cup of the same awful coffee. "You ever sleep, Harper?" David chuckled, eyes tired. "Only when the coffee pot's empty." Peter leaned against the fridge, crossing his arms. "You said this woman. Ella showed up out of nowhere, asked for a room we haven't booked in years, and then mailed your daughter a book she somehow remembers." David nodded. "That about covers it. You still think it's coincidence I stopped believing in coincidence the day Lily walked into my life." Peter was quiet for a moment, then nodded toward the doorway. "Tell me again, from the beginning, why you adopted her." David sipped his coffee. The memory came quickly, uninvited, but familiar like a scar with weather memory. 6 years ago, the hospital had been overrun with flu cases, holiday chaos, and short-staffed nurses. David had been volunteering there part-time, unable to return to full nursing work after the accident that took his wife. His therapist had encouraged service. "Give back what's hurting," she'd said. "Sometimes it softens when it's shared." That night he'd been delivering charts when he heard crying echoing from the pediatric wing. Not the usual baby's cry, sharp or scared, but not panicked. It was rhythmic, as if the child had given up on being heard and was just reminding the world she existed. He found her in a crib, alone. A nurse nearby explained casually that she'd been left in emergency foster care. The case was complicated family conflict, they said. A failed kinship adoption. No immediate relatives stepped forward. "She doesn't have a name yet," the nurse added. "Goes by Lily on the charts. No birth certificate processed." David looked down into the crib. The baby wasn't crying anymore. She was staring up at him. Her hands were balled into fists, but her eyes, there was no fear there. Just awareness. A knowing beyond her months. He reached in instinctively, letting her grab one finger. Her hand was warm, her grip fierce. And in that moment, something inside him cracked open a dam, a wall, a silence he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since Emily died. "I didn't mean to adopt her," David said now, voice low. "Not at first. I just kept visiting. Then one night they told me the foster agency couldn't place her. Not with her background. No medical history, no family claims, just a sealed file and a warning. She may have complications. Peter raised a brow. She's the healthiest kid I've ever seen. David smiled. I know. She saved you, Peter said quietly. David nodded. Every day since. Peter sat across from him. So, what now? You think Ella's... What the birth mother, I don't know what I think. But the way she looked at Lily... It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Are you going to tell Lily? David sighed, staring into his cup. She's too young. But one day... Yeah, I have to. She deserves to know. Peter leaned forward. Just make sure when that day comes you remind her of one thing. What's that? That love is not defined by blood. It's shown by who stays. Later that evening, David tucked Lily into bed, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek as she hugged her stuffed giraffe. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yeah, bug. Do you think clouds get lost?" He blinked. "What do you mean? Like in the story, when the cloud forgets where it belongs." David sat on the edge of the bed. Maybe. But sometimes things that seem lost are just taking the long way home. She seemed to like that answer. She reached for his hand. "If I ever get lost, will you come find me?" His voice caught. "Always." She closed her eyes, content. And as David sat in the dim light watching his daughter breathe softly, the truth settled like the dust on the window pane. He didn't know what Ella Morgan wanted. Didn't know why now or what would come next. But he knew who Lily was. She was his daughter. Not because of papers, not because of fate, but because the day she looked at him from that hospital crib something in him had promised. And David Harper was a man who kept his promises, even when they hurt, even when they were tested, especially then. Outside, the night deepened. Room 211 remained empty, its lights dark, its door closed. But in the quiet, something shifted, like the air itself knew that old ghosts were not gone. Just waiting. The wind was sharp that afternoon, the kind that made scarves flap like prayer flags and turned breath into steam. The front bell above the Crestwood Inn's door jingled lightly as it opened, letting in a gust of cold air and the soft patter of little footsteps. David looked up from behind the counter just as Lily skipped in from school, her cheeks rosy, her backpack bouncing on her back. "We had music today," she said, dropping her bag with theatrical exhaustion. "Mr. Sanderson let me be the conductor." David smiled. "That explains the jazz hands." Lily grinned, then plopped onto the old armchair near the fireplace, kicking off her shoes and pulling out her sketch pad. It was part of their routine now David's shift would begin. Lily would settle into the lobby's comfort zone like it was her own personal reading nook, and they'd both carry on orbiting each other in a rhythm that felt like family. David turned back to the computer, beginning to log inventory for the week. Then the door opened again. This time it was her, Ella Morgan. She was dressed plainly gray coat, dark jeans, a scarf wound tightly around her neck, but her presence brought with it a gravity that David felt before he even turned fully to look at her. His stomach tightened. Lily looked up. Her eyes widened. "Oh, hi," the little girl said cautiously. Ella's breath caught. "Hi." David stood measured. "Miss Morgan, I didn't mean to interrupt." Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "I was just passing through. Thought I'd drop something off." She held up a small paper bag folded neatly at the top. "Some books. From my collection. I thought maybe Lily might like them." David hesitated. Lily, ever curious, bounced off the chair and skipped over. "What kind of books?" Ella knelt slowly, holding the bag at Lily's height. "Ones about brave girls, adventurers, dreamers." Lily peeked inside and gasped. "Amelia Earhart. There's a real book about her." David stepped closer, protective but cautious. "Lily, why don't you go read at the desk for a bit, okay?" Lily clutched the books like treasure. "Thanks, Miss Ella," she said softly. Lily nodded. "Thanks, Miss Ella." David waited until Lily returned to the armchair, then turned to Ella with quiet intensity. "You need to tell me what this is," he said, voice low. "Why you're here. Why now?" Ella looked down at her gloved hands, then back at him. Her eyes shimmered. "I won't stay, I promise. But I had to see her. I didn't know how else. I didn't come to hurt either of you." David's jaw clenched. "Then what did you come for?" Ella exhaled shakily. "To be sure she's okay. To see it with my own eyes." David searched her face. There was no accusation there, no entitlement, just a longing so raw, so utterly human that it pulled something taut inside him. "I think you should go," he said quietly. She nodded, but before she turned, Lily called out from her seat. "Miss Ella." Ella froze. "Can I read you something?" David's heart skipped. Ella looked at him uncertain, as if asking for permission. He didn't answer, only stood in silence as she approached the chair. Lily opened the cloud that came back the copy Ella had sent. She began to read aloud, her voice rising and falling like music. The little cloud wandered too far. She thought she'd be brave, but the sky was too big and she forgot how to find home. Ella's eyes filled with tears, but the wind chased her, whispering her name, not scolding, just calling her back, because even clouds get lost, and even wind forgives. Lily paused, looking up. "I like this part." Ella pressed a hand to her mouth. David finally moved, walking toward them, heart pounding with an ache he couldn't explain. "Where did you learn to read like that bug?" he asked gently. Lily shrugged. "I don't know. It just feels like I already knew it." Ella rose slowly. "I should go." David looked at her for a long moment, then said something he hadn't planned to say. "You want to sit for a minute?" She blinked. "I don't want to confuse her." "She's not confused," he said quietly. "She's just kind." Ella looked at the girl, who was now deeply engrossed in a picture of a girl flying an old plane. Then she sat on the edge of the opposite couch, still distant but present. David remained standing the triangle between them, delicate as crystal. For 10 full minutes, no one spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow began to drift lightly in the dusk. Lily yawned, curled up on the cushions, book still open on her chest. "She looks like her," Ella whispered. David turned to her, brows furrowed. "My grandmother." The eyes. She smiled faintly. "She used to say we had sky-colored eyes. I never thought I'd see them again." There was no anger in her voice, no claim, only wonder. David sat down finally across from her. He studied her. Not just the grief in her eyes, but the strength, the stillness. "You wrote that story, didn't you?" Ella nodded. "I used to whisper it to her in the hospital, before they took her." David rubbed his palms together, voice low. "She's happy, Ella. She's loved. She's safe." "I know," Ella said, wiping her cheek. "I see that." "Why now?" Ella met his gaze. "Because I couldn't live another day wondering if I'd done the right thing by walking away. I needed to know she landed somewhere soft." David looked back at the girl asleep beside the fire. "She did," he said. They sat in silence again, not as strangers, but not yet as anything else. Just two people bound by the same small life, one they both had found and lost and found again. Outside, the dusk settled into night, and the wind curled softly against the window panes, whispering of things not broken but mended. Quietly. Together. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of cold, brittle morning where frost etched patterns on windshields and breath came out in small clouds. Inside the Crestwood Inn, the heat was humming, and Lily had bundled herself up in her favorite sweater, the one with little foxes on it, and sat at the front desk with David coloring while he checked the reservation logs. They were supposed to stop for cocoa after school. That was the plan. David remembered that later, how normal it had all felt before the world tipped on its axis. At first it was subtle. Lily shifted in her seat, rubbed at her chest, and cleared her throat. Then she coughed once, twice. David looked over, brow creasing. "You okay, bug?" She nodded, but her face was pale. He stood up, walked over, crouched beside her. Her breathing was shallow. No wheezing yet, but close. "Where's your inhaler?" "In my bag." He grabbed the small pink backpack, rummaging until his fingers found the plastic case. He pulled it out, clicked the cap, guided her through 2 puffs. But something was wrong. Her chest still rose too fast. Her lips had begun to pale. His calm cracked. David scooped her into his arms and carried her into the staff lounge, laying her gently on the couch. "Stay with me, Lily. Just breathe. You're okay. You're okay." He reached for the backup medicine, a stronger dose kept in the emergency drawer. It was gone. Panic surged like electricity. He tore through the cabinet again. No vial, no nebulizer. He always kept a second one, but last week's snowstorm had delayed the refill delivery and he'd meant to pick one up yesterday. But work had run long. And now Lily's fingers gripped his sleeve. She was scared. And so was he. Then the front door flew open. Ella stood there, her coat half unbuttoned, snow clinging to her boots. She'd just arrived for a quiet visit, another drop-off of books and soft gestures. But the moment she saw David's face through the glass, the panic in his eyes, she ran. Now she was standing in the hallway, seeing Lily collapsed on the couch, breath ragged and sharp. Without hesitation, she moved past David. "Where's her emergency med?" she asked. "It's gone." I didn't realize Ella didn't wait." She dropped her bag and pulled out a slim, zippered pouch. Inside it, a small vial and a nebulizer mouthpiece, clean and sealed. Her hands moved fast, unwrapping, prepping, priming. David watched in stunned silence. "How did you—" "She used to take this dosage," Ella said, kneeling beside Lily. "Twice a week, at the hospital. She was born with mild bronchial sensitivity. They said she'd grow out of it." David was frozen. Ella placed the mouthpiece to Lily's lips and flipped the switch. A soft hum filled the air as vapor began to mist. Lily's breathing fought, then softened. The color began to return to her cheeks. Her grip loosened. David sank to his knees, hands trembling. Ella sat motionless, steadying the device with one hand, her other gently stroking Lily's hair. "Easy, baby," she whispered. "I've got you." And in that moment, David heard it. The word, baby. Spoken so quietly, so reflexively, as if it had never left her mouth. As if it had never been taken from her. Minutes passed. The medication worked. Lily drifted into sleep, breathing steady now. The color in her face was warm again. David sat on the floor beside the couch, head bowed, one hand still gripping the empty inhaler like it might tell him why it hadn't been enough. Ella didn't move. She stayed there watching Lily, her expression unreadable. When David finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "You knew the dosage. You had the exact vial." Ella nodded slowly. David looked at her, eyes filled with something between gratitude and confusion. How Ella didn't answer right away. She just stared at the sleeping child. Then she said quietly, "Because I used to be her mother." David's breath caught. "I mean, legally I never was. My parents, they handled it before the paperwork ever said she was mine. But I carried her. I named her. I held her for 9 hours before they sedated me." She looked at him then. "I wasn't crazy, David. I was devastated. And they used that against me." David's throat tightened. "Why didn't you come for her sooner?" Ella looked down at her hands. "Because I was broken. For a long time. And I was afraid that if I showed up, I'd bring chaos. That it would undo everything she had." David didn't answer. He looked at Lily again, peaceful, safe. "Why now?" he asked. Ella's voice broke. "Because I couldn't live not knowing if she was okay. And when I saw her that first night, when I saw you, I realized she had something I'd never expected." He looked at her. "She had you," Ella said, "and she had joy." They sat in silence again. But it was different now. The silence wasn't distance. It was understanding. David reached out and took the nebulizer from her hands, turned it off, and set it aside. "She called you "Hope," he said. Ella looked up. "The first time she read your story, she said, 'That cloud is me, and the wind sounds like my mom.'" Tears slid down Ella's cheek. "I told her that story in the hospital, whispered it when no one was looking." "She remembers," David said. Ella covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. He didn't stop her, didn't ask her to leave, didn't claim Lily as only his. In that moment, under the soft hum of the heater and the muffled sounds of snow against the windows, they weren't rivals or threats. They were two people who had once lost the same thing, and now somehow both had found their way back to it. Together. The snow had deepened overnight, muffling the world in silence. By morning, the landscape outside the Crestwood Inn was pure and untouched, the parking lot reduced to soft white drifts, and the skeletal trees crowned with crystal dust. Inside, David stood in the kitchen staring at the stove without really seeing it. The coffee pot had long since stopped dripping. His hands rested on the counter knuckles, pale, motionless. He had barely slept. Lily was upstairs, still recovering, still curled in the warmth of her blankets. Her breathing was normal again, her cheeks no longer pale. The emergency had passed, but inside David something hadn't settled. Ella's words echoed relentlessly. "I used to be her mother." It wasn't the revelation that haunted him, it was the sincerity in her voice, the calm, the raw, unpolished truth of it, not an accusation, not a demand, just grief and love, and something he hadn't expected to feel understanding. When Ella returned to the inn the next morning, she didn't knock. She stepped through the lobby doors slowly, as if uncertain whether the warmth would still welcome her. David was waiting. He was seated in the same armchair Lily had once claimed as hers, a manila envelope resting on the table beside him. Ella's breath caught. "I thought maybe you wouldn't. I wanted to talk," David said gently. "Just us." "Lily's still asleep." She nodded and approached. Her coat was dusted with snow and her hands were shaking slightly, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone ready to face what needed to be faced. David gestured for her to sit. She did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then David reached for the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of an intake form, Lily's original placement file from Child Protective Services. "I've read this a dozen times," he said, "and I never questioned it. She was categorized as an abandoned child with unknown parentage. No names, no family willing to step forward. Case closed." Ella stared at it. "They erased you," he said. "Not just legally. They erased you." Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. "I begged them," she whispered. "When they said I had postpartum depression, I didn't fight. I should have. But I was 28. I'd just lost everything and the people I thought I could trust. They told me if I loved her, I'd walk away." She swallowed hard. "They told me I wasn't stable, that I wasn't enough, that I'd ruin her life." David's voice was quiet. "You believed them." "I had to," she said, her voice cracking, "because if I didn't, the guilt would have killed me. So I let them take her. And then I left the country before I could change my mind." David leaned back, breath-slow, shoulders heavy. "I've been angry," he admitted. "Not at you. I didn't know enough to be angry at you. But at the system. At the silence. For years, I thought, who gives up a child without a word? Who walks away from someone like Lily? Ella looked down. I didn't walk away. I was pushed. I was medicated, threatened, gaslit. And when I came to my senses, it was too late." David looked at her then, not as a threat, not as an intruder, but as a mother who had suffered in the shadows of her own story. "I don't want to take her," Ella said quickly, as if the words had been waiting trembling on the edge of her breath. "I would never do that. I know what she has now. I see it. She's joyful. She's whole." David's voice softened. "But you miss her." Ella blinked, tears slipping down. "Every day. Even before I found her. I missed someone I wasn't allowed to remember." She reached into her purse and pulled out a letter creased and worn. I wrote this the night they took her, she said. I meant to give it to her one day, but I never got the chance. David unfolded it slowly. The ink had smudged slightly as if touched by tears long dried. My hope. If someone is reading this to you one day, it means you've grown into someone wonderful. I won't take credit for that, but I hope you'll know I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. I named you Hope because that's what you were to me, the part of my life that told me light was still possible, that love could still survive the storm. I wasn't strong enough to keep you, but I pray I was strong enough to let you go with love. David read the final line aloud, barely above a whisper. Wherever you are, I hope you feel me in the wind that calls you home. The silence that followed was sacred. No questions, no explanations, just truth. David looked at Ella, and in his eyes there was no more suspicion, only a deep, weary kind of grace. I don't know what this means, he said honestly. I don't know how we move forward. Neither do I, she replied. I'm not asking for answers, only the chance to be near her, not as her mother, just as someone who cares. David nodded slowly. She's old enough to ask questions, he said. One day she'll want to know who she looks like, why she remembers a story she's never been told. I won't hide this from her forever. Ella straightened. When that day comes, I'll be whatever she needs. Nothing more. David folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. You already are, he said. You're someone she instinctively trusts. That counts for more than biology ever could. Outside, the snow was still falling soft and unhurried. Inside, something else had begun to thaw. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding, and with it the possibility fragile and tentative of something they might build, together, in the open, for Lily, and for all the days they could no longer get back but maybe could learn to honor. The snow had stopped, but the hush it left behind lingered like a memory. David stood at the kitchen sink drying a mug with deliberate slowness, his mind elsewhere. The letter from Ella sat on the kitchen table behind him, folded with care, its weight still heavy in his chest. Upstairs, Lily's footsteps padded along the hallway, then the creak of her bedroom door followed by the familiar thump of her running down the stairs. "Morning, Bug," David said, keeping his tone light. "Morning," she chirped, hopping onto the bar stool and rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Guess what?" I dreamed David raised a brow. "You were flying through the sky on a giant marshmallow." She giggled. "No, silly, I was a cloud again. But this time the wind was singing. It knew my name." David's hands paused on the towel. He turned slowly. She said, "Hope." That was my name in the dream. The towel slipped from his hands. Lily blinked up at him, head tilted. "Isn't that funny?" David crouched beside her, heart thudding. "Lily, you remember that name?" She nodded. Not from before, just from inside. He swallowed hard. There was no preparing for this moment. No perfect script, no fatherly manual for how to explain to a child that life is more complex than bedtime stories. "Can I tell you something important?" he asked gently. Lily's eyes widened. She nodded. David reached for her small hand, wrapping it in both of his. "You know how I always tell you families are made from love, not just from who we're born?" "Two." She nodded, slowly attentive, now sensing the shift in tone. "Well," he continued, "there's someone who loved you before I ever met you. Someone who carried you in her heart, even when she couldn't carry you in her arms." Lily's lips parted. "Her name is Ella," he said softly. "And she's the one who gave you the name Hope." Lily's brows knitted. Miss Ella David nodded. Lily looked down, processing. "So, she's my first mom." David hesitated. "She's the mother who gave you life, yes. But I'm still your dad, Bug. Nothing will ever change that." She looked up, eyes searching his. "Did she give me away?" "No," he said firmly. "That's what I used to think. But it's not the truth. She was taken from you. She was hurting, and people made decisions that weren't fair to her or to you." Lily was quiet for a long time. David let her sit with it. Then she asked, "Does she still love me?" He couldn't keep the emotion from his voice. So much. She never stopped. Lily nodded. Just once. Then she slid down from the stool and walked over to the living room window. Outside, frost clung to the glass, but sunlight was starting to break through. David joined her in silence. After a minute, she said, "Can I see her?" His chest ached. "You can, if you want to." Lily turned her voice suddenly small. "But I don't have to go live with her, right?" David knelt again, looked her straight in the eyes. "No. You're my daughter. Always. This isn't about changing that. It's just about letting love be bigger than we thought." She nodded, then wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tightly. "I love you, Daddy." His throat closed. "I love you more than anything." That afternoon, Ella was sitting on the park bench near the frozen fountain in town, her breath curling into the cold air, a book unopened in her lap. She hadn't expected a call. Not today, not this soon. But her phone buzzed. A text. "David, she knows." Ella's heart stopped. Her hands shook. Another message. "David, she wants to see you. Are you free now?" Ella blinked back tears and typed, "Yes, I'll be there in 10. When Ella arrived at the inn, she paused just inside the lobby, uncertain again, until she heard the softest voice from behind the armchair. "Hi, Miss Ella." Ella turned slowly. Lily stood there, hands folded in front of her. Her favorite blue sweater slightly rumpled, a cautious smile on her face. Ella bent to her knees. "Hi, Lily," she whispered. There was a beat of silence between them, thick and fragile. Then Lily asked, "Can I call you Miss Hope instead?" Ella's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she nodded, eyes filling. "You can call me whatever feels right to you." Lily stepped forward and without another word wrapped her arms around Ella's neck. Ella held her carefully, reverently, as if afraid she'd disappear. David watched from the counter, heart pounding. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Something bigger than understanding was passing between them, something ancient and unnameable. Not just reunion, but recognition. That evening, they all sat in the lounge. Ella read aloud from The Cloud That Came Back. Lily curled beside her David, close by, listening with the kind of stillness that only comes when something long broken finally begins to heal. As Ella closed the book, Lily yawned and whispered, "Maybe next time you can bring a story that's happy all the way through." Ella smiled. "I think maybe we're writing one right now." David looked over at her, something soft flickering behind his eyes. For the first time, the word "we" didn't sound complicated. It sounded like hope. The sun had just begun to set, brushing the snow-covered town in pale gold and lavender when David pulled the car into the school parking lot. It was Friday, the day of the winter showcase. The lot was full of bundled-up parents and excited children, the air laced with the scent of cinnamon and anticipation. Inside, the gymnasium rows of folding chairs faced a modest stage wrapped in twinkle lights and hand-drawn snowflakes. It was simple, sweet, and exactly the kind of community event that Lily loved. She had been practicing her song for weeks. But this evening, something else pulsed beneath the surface. Tonight, Ella was coming not as a stranger or a visitor, but for the first time, as someone invited. David spotted her before she saw him. She stood just outside the entrance, nervously adjusting her scarf, holding a small paper program like it might tear in her hands. The ambient sound of laughter and movement seemed to float around her without touching her. He walked over. "You made it." Ella turned. Her smile was tight, unsure. Wasn't going to miss it. David gave a small nod. "She's in the second act." Ella glanced toward the door. "She asked if I could sit near you." His eyes softened. "Then you should." Inside, they found a pair of seats near the front. Ella sat gingerly, her back straight, hands clasped in her lap. David leaned over slightly. "You okay?" She nodded, though her voice trembled. "I feel like I'm trespassing on something sacred." He looked around at the families, the decorations made of construction paper, the off-key piano warming up. Nothing about this is sacred, just heartfelt. She turned to him. "That's exactly what makes it feel sacred." The lights dimmed. Applause rippled through the room as the showcase began, children singing, stumbling through poetry, giggling through dance numbers. The audience responded with kindness even when performances faltered. It was imperfect, genuine joy. And then Lily stepped onto the stage. David held his breath. She was dressed in a simple white dress, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon. She held a small mic and waited for the music to cue. Ella's hand pressed over her heart. The first notes played a soft melody from The Cloud That Came Back. Not the published version. The one Ella had handwritten in her journal years ago. The one Lily had found comfort in before she even knew who'd written it. And then Lily sang, "If the wind should lose its way, I'll wait right here, I'll never stray. For clouds may wander soft and slow, but home is where the love will grow." Her voice was fragile, clear, and just slightly shy, but it carried. Every word landed like snowfall. David blinked back tears. Next to him, Ella was trembling. Her shoulders shook with each line, but she didn't cry loudly. Her expression was one of disbelief, reverence. A mother hearing her daughter sing their story out loud in a room full of people who had no idea what it meant. As the song ended, applause burst through the gym. Lily gave a small curtsy and waved. Her eyes scanned the room and found them. She smiled just for them. After the showcase, as families crowded around to take photos and give hugs, Lily came barreling down the bleachers straight into Ella's arms. "You sang like an angel," Ella whispered. "I was thinking of the clouds," Lily said. "And of you." David approached a quiet strength beside them. "You've got a fan club now." Lily looked up at him. "Can we go get hot chocolate with Miss Hope?" He smiled. "You read my mind." Later that night, the three of them sat at a corner table in the town's little coffee shop, sipping warm drinks beneath hanging Edison bulbs and garlands of pine. Lily sat between them, contentedly munching a snowman cookie. When she dashed off to use the bathroom, David turned to Ella. "You okay?" Ella nodded. "That was more than I ever dreamed. I didn't think she'd want me there, let alone sing something like that. She doesn't fully understand everything yet," David said. "But what she does understand is love. She feels it. She recognizes yours." Ella's eyes shimmered. "I didn't come into this expecting anything. No titles, no roles. I just wanted to see her smile." David stirred his coffee. "You gave her that story, Ella. It became something she clung to before she even knew you. I think somehow part of you was with her all along." Ella looked down. "Do you ever think it's too much letting me be here in her life?" He considered the question carefully. "I think life gave her two people who love her in different ways." And I think he paused. "If we let her decide what to do with that love, she'll be okay." Ella let out a shaky breath. "I can be a quiet presence," she said. "The person who shows up for the recitals and reads stories and writes letters, even if she doesn't read them all at once." David looked at her more deeply now. "I think maybe you don't have to stay in the background." Her brow furrowed. He continued, "Maybe there's space for you to be more than just a visitor. Maybe we don't define what this is yet. Maybe we just let it grow." Her eyes filled again, but this time not from grief. "Are you sure I'm sure of one thing?" David said quietly. "She's happiest when we're both in the room." A pause. Then Ella smiled, one not tinged with sorrow, not guarded with guilt. A real smile. And just then Lily returned, sliding into her seat and reaching for her cocoa. "Did I miss anything?" David and Ella shared a glance. "No," Ella said softly. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and quiet and steady. Inside, for the first time in years, no one was waiting for the storm to pass. They were already home. The night of the winter showcase had settled something in all of them. Not with words, not even with formal decisions, but with warmth. A shared breath. A collective, quiet agreement. We don't know what this is yet, but it matters. In the days that followed, life continued as it always did. Lily returned to school. David resumed his late shifts. Ella kept her distance but stopped hiding in it. She no longer lingered on the edges of the parking lot or waited until dusk to drop things off. She came during the day, often just to sit and talk with Lily by the front desk or to read aloud with her in the lounge while David filed reports at the counter pretending not to listen, even as his heart did. Still, it wasn't simple. David often found himself staring out the window, coffee growing cold in his hands, wondering what the right shape of this new life should be. He was a man who liked structure roles boundaries. But this didn't have a name. He was Lily's father, and Ella was more than anything he had words for. One evening, Lily broke the silence as they sat together in the living room stringing popcorn for the Christmas tree. "Daddy." "Yeah, Bug." "Can I tell you a secret?" He smiled, threading a fresh piece. "You know I love secrets." She leaned close and whispered, "I think Miss Hope should come live closer." David's fingers paused. "She has a cozy voice," Lily added, "and when she laughs, it sounds like something I remember even though I don't know why." David looked at her for a long moment, and in that small, innocent suggestion, something inside him shifted. Maybe the shape of love wasn't fixed. Maybe it was something you built from scratch like a new treehouse or a song. Maybe it wasn't about whose name was on the birth certificate. Maybe it was about who showed up and kept showing up even when things were hard. It was 2 nights before Christmas when Ella received the invitation. It wasn't from David. It wasn't even from Lily. It was from the town's elementary school, slid into her mailbox in a red envelope with snowflake stickers. Inside, a printed flyer with Lily's class holiday program schedule, and at the bottom, in careful handwriting, "Please sit in the front row. You're part of this too now." Ella stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. For so long she had asked herself if she had the right to even see her daughter. Now her daughter was inviting her into the story. Not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. The night of the performance, the school gym buzzed with parents in festive sweaters and clumsy Santa hats. Children darted around with glitter still clinging to their faces. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling, spinning gently in the warmth. David saved her a seat beside him. When Ella arrived, he rose not awkwardly but like a man meeting someone who mattered and took her coat. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked both nervous and radiant. "Thank you," she whispered, taking her seat beside him. "You don't have to thank me," David said. "This is yours too." The lights dimmed. The chatter quieted. Lily's class was last. Ella sat still through the earlier acts, though David noticed the way her fingers twisted in her lap, the way she blinked more often than usual. Then Lily appeared on stage. She was wearing a silver dress and a hand-knitted scarf, and when the spotlight hit her, she didn't flinch. She stepped to the microphone with the poise of someone far older than 7. "I want to sing a song that my friend wrote a long time ago," she said clearly. "But I think it was meant for now." David stiffened slightly. Ella's breath caught. Then Lily began to sing, not the cloud song this time, but a new one, her own. Sometimes love starts quiet, a whisper in the night. Sometimes love comes broken, but still it finds the light. I thought I was just lucky to have one heart to hold. But then I found another A story still untold. And now I've got 2 voices that call me when I'm scared. I didn't know it earlier, but love is just what's shared. By the last line, the audience was silent. Even the kids who had fidgeted moments earlier sat still. David's hands were clenched together. Ella sat perfectly motionless except for the tears rolling down her face. When the applause finally erupted, Lily looked straight at them, first to David, then to Ella, and gave a smile that didn't need translation. David wiped his eyes and leaned toward Ella. "She wrote that last verse last night," he whispered. Ella nodded too, overcome to speak. Outside, the three of them walked quietly through the crisp air, their breath fogging in front of them. Lily walked between them, each hand holding one of theirs. A triangle. A bond. Not perfect, not conventional, but whole. At the car, Lily turned to Ella. "Will you come for Christmas morning?" she asked, eyes hopeful. David looked at Ella, uncertain how she would answer. Ella crouched, meeting Lily at eye level. "I would love that," she said. Then Lily whispered, "Maybe we can write a new story together." Ella smiled through tears. "I think we already are." David stood in silence, heart full. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man trying to protect something fragile. He felt like a man watching something grow stronger. Together, they were rewriting what love could look like. And in doing so, they were finally finding their way home. The snow had melted in patches by New Year's Day. Outside the Crestwood Inn, the rooftops still held a soft glaze of frost, but the sidewalks shimmered wet under the late morning sun. Icicles dripped steadily from the eaves, ticking like a slow clock. Inside the inn was quiet, its lobby filled with the scent of pine from the small tree David and Lily had decorated just after Thanksgiving. A few stray ornaments still clung to its branches, one of them a felt cloud, with glittering thread sewn through it. Lily had stitched it herself. Upstairs, room 211 had been reopened. Officially, it was now used as a guest suite again. But unofficially, it had taken on a new kind of weight, no longer a room of mystery, but a room that held memory, reunion, and healing. That morning, Lily stood in the doorway of room 211 holding a small notebook in her arms. She wore fuzzy socks and a cardigan several sizes too big, one Ella had lent her. David leaned in the hallway, watching his daughter with the quiet awe that had come to define this chapter of his life. "Ready?" he asked. Lily looked over her shoulder and nodded. "Can we do it together?" He smiled. "Of course." They stepped into the room together, and David closed the door behind them. Inside, Ella was already there, seated on the window bench, sunlight falling across her lap. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. "I brought the story," Lily announced, holding the notebook high. Ella sat straighter. "The one you've been writing?" Lily nodded. "I finished it last night. I want to read it with both of you here." David and Ella sat side by side on the edge of the bed while Lily climbed into the armchair near the window. She opened the notebook with reverence. "It's called The Girl Who Had Two Winds." Ella blinked, emotion flickering across her face. Lily began to read. Once there was a little girl made of light and laughter. She had been carried into the world by a strong wind named Hope. But when she was born, Hope got lost in the clouds and the girl didn't know where she came from. Another wind came soft and strong. His name was Steady. He picked up the girl and wrapped her in warmth. He gave her stories and pancakes and the feeling of home. For a while, that's all the girl knew. But sometimes at night she would hear a whisper, a wind she didn't remember but that somehow remembered her. One day, the girl followed that whisper. And she found hope again. But instead of being torn between the winds, she realized something beautiful. She didn't have to choose. The winds had chosen her. Lily looked up then. "It's not finished," she added, "but I think I'll keep writing it as we go." David blinked hard, his throat tight. He glanced at Ella, who sat perfectly still, one hand pressed gently to her heart, tears on her cheeks, but smiling. "That's the most beautiful story I've ever heard," she whispered. Lily beamed. Later that evening, the three of them shared a quiet dinner leftover stew, warm bread, and a soft jazz record spinning on the player in the corner. No fanfare, no grand declarations, just a sense of ease. David cleared the dishes while Ella helped Lily braid her hair for bed. It was something Ella had done a few times now, small, gentle acts that once might have felt like oversteps but now simply felt like care, like family. When Lily finally fell asleep, curled under a blanket with her notebook beside her pillow, David walked Ella to the door. The night was cold but clear, the stars like frost scattered across black velvet. Ella hesitated, coat in hand. "I still don't know what this is." "What we're doing." David exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Neither do I." She looked up at him. "Is that okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is. We're building something none of us were taught how to build. That takes time." A pause. "Room 211 used to be the place I avoided," he added. "Now it's where I found the missing piece." Ella smiled faintly. "Funny, I thought it was where I'd left everything behind. But maybe it was just waiting." David looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. Not romantic tension, not obligation, but acceptance, respect, a quiet mutual recognition of the scars and strengths they each carried. He opened the door for her, then paused. "You'll come back tomorrow." Ella hesitated only a second. Then, "Yes, if that's still okay." "It is." She stepped into the night, pulling her coat tighter, the crisp air kissing her cheeks. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She already knew the way. And upstairs in room 211, the storybook remained on Lily's nightstand. The wind outside the window stirred lightly, playfully. Not lost, not stormy, just returning again and again to the place where it was always meant to be. Home. Sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes with wounds and questions, but when it's real, when it stays, heals, and grows, it becomes more than a bond. It becomes a second chance. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful kind of love there is. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We're always amazed by how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new release. We share stories that inspire hope, healing, and the quiet strength of everyday people every single week. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and stay with us.